Are just about to begin. I know in the past we've been waiting about 5 minutes after the time we were going to begin so that if people are having trouble connecting or if they are having trouble getting into the Zoom meeting, we give them a few minutes to do that. So I have 9:01 right now, and we're going to wait another 3 or 4 minutes. And so I just wanted to let you know that. If you are coming to the webinar for challenging our understanding of grammar teaching, you are in the right place. So just a few more minutes and we will get started. Thanks. Okay, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. Thank you for being interested in the topic of challenging our understanding of grammar teaching. If you are a language teacher, I'm sure that you know that there are lots and lots of myths around the teaching of grammar, whether it's good, whether it's not, whether we should do it, whether we shouldn't. And I'm sure that you've been around and know that the methods even tell us, the pedagogy even tells us that sometimes it should be taught and sometimes it shouldn't be taught, when we should teach it and how we should teach it. So I thought that it might be a very good topic for us to talk about in this webinar. The other thing I wanted to let you know is that this webinar is going to use another feature of Zoom that we haven't yet used in our webinars. And these are called breakout rooms. Now, a breakout room is a digital room that you are each going to enter. So at various times, I think it's 4 times in this webinar, I'm going to say, okay, it's time for us to break into breakout rooms. And we will, I will push a button and then Zoom will automatically break you into groups. You may be with people that you know, you may be with people that you don't know. It will be done randomly, but it will be a small group. So probably about 4 people or 5 people in each group. This allows you to talk to each other in the group and to answer the questions that I've posed for you, and then to come back to the larger group. Now, we have a very large group. So ideally, as you know, as teachers, if you break students into groups, it's ideal if you allow them to debrief, to share and discuss what they have covered in their small group discussion. But because we have such a large group today, I'm going to ask you at various times to have someone in your group enter your answers into the chat. So we will record that in the chat and we will continue with the webinar. Okay, I know it's a lot of information right at the beginning, but I think it's going to be exciting and interesting if it all works. And we never know if technology is going to work, right? Okay, so the first one is just kind of a warm up, and I'd like you to think about grammar teaching. As we discussed, teachers and researchers and even our pedagogical methods have demonstrated divergent beliefs and attitudes, very, very divergent, about whether we should teach grammar or not in language classrooms. So in a moment, I'm going to break you into groups and I'm going to ask you to share with each other what is your view of the value of grammar in the language classroom. Should it be taught explicitly? Do you think that students can gain a knowledge of grammar subconsciously? So just have a short discussion. It's only going to be a 2-minute breakout. Actually, it'd be 3 minutes by the time it's finished, because you will be there for 2 minutes and then you will receive a message in the breakout room that tells you have 1 more minute to come back to the larger group. Okay, so let's see how this works. Going to the button. Now you should have an invitation and you can move to your breakout room. Good. Some of you are moving. Keep moving. You will be in a group of 4. Introduce yourselves and then discuss what is the value of grammar in the language classroom. Need to move. Need to accept. Good. So it looks like we're all starting to come back from the breakout room. I know that some of you did not have 4 people in your room. The critical component of a breakout room is that when you get the invitation to join a breakout room, you have to accept that invitation. And so those that were given an invitation to join it did not accept, and so did not come to your room. Next time we go into a breakout room, I'll probably try to put maybe 5 participants in the room, and that way maybe there'll be a group of 3 for sure that join your room. But I hope at least that you got to see the use of the breakout room in Zoom as an interesting feature. Okay, a couple of people are saying in the chat that they couldn't join the room. That's interesting. We will have to see if that continues through the webinar. I'm sorry to hear that. So what I would like to do now is, as I said, when you would be teaching, you would prefer to talk through with your students what they've talked about in their rooms. And we don't have the time or ability to do that with each of you in this webinar. However, I'm sure that we could talk about some of the viewpoints that you might have shared in your breakout rooms. We were talking about what is the value of grammar in the language classroom. So someone in your room might have said something like, my students want grammar. It's something they understand and they can do, and I believe they need grammar. That might have been something that was shared. Could have been that someone said, yes, we absolutely have to teach grammar. If students learn correct grammar and practice it from the beginning, they'll have a good foundation to build upon. So this is a view of grammar, that it is the foundation of language and the foundation of what we need as language teachers to impart to our students. One of you might have mentioned something about tradition. Grammar has always been a part of our language teaching, and it continues to be a part because it's that important. But someone maybe who was thinking, who had been trying to adopt some more modern technologies or modern methodologies might have said something like, the students don't want to understand grammar in this way. It's too many rules and exceptions. So I use a whole language approach, or I use a communicative approach, or I use an approach that doesn't focus on explicit language rules, but instead gets the students a broad understanding of language. And, others might have said, I don't try to teach grammar rules. I try to teach language explicitly. However, if something gets very, very confusing, I might use an explicit mini lesson and lots of examples to help students with grammar. And I'm sure you all shared many, many other very interesting ideas and views about the teaching of grammar. So I'd like to move into one of the myths about grammar. And we're going to challenge the idea and challenge the concept that grammar is an area of knowledge. Okay? Now, obviously, grammar is an area of knowledge, right? We can have knowledge of a language system, and we can have knowledge of how to use the language system. And Anderson in 1983 called that declarative knowledge and procedural knowledge. And it's actually very common for native speakers of a language to have very good procedural knowledge and very unsatisfying declarative knowledge of their own language. If any of you have ever studied a language and talked to a native speaker who is your teacher and said, so why is this verb irregular? Or why does this sentence have to be said this way? And the native speaker said something like, I don't know, but it just sounds right, right? This is procedural knowledge. They have knowledge of how to use the language, but they don't have the declarative knowledge. Actually, non-native speaker teachers often have better declarative knowledge of the language because they've taken a great deal more time to study it. So Larson Freeman, and much of this presentation is based on Larson Freeman's recent book called Teaching Language from Grammar to Grammaring. Larson Freeman suggests that instead of thinking of grammar as a knowledge base, it's better to think of grammar as a skill. Grammar is not fixed and rigid. It's not a set of rules and exceptions that you can put on a piece of paper and memorize. It's much more dynamic than the term grammar allows. And so Larson Freeman suggests the word grammaring, which focuses on as a skill, which can be practiced, can be changed, and is dynamic and developing. So we're going to explore that just a little bit. So let's take the idea that language is dynamic and not static. Okay? And let's look at a couple of questions. Let's have a small practice about this. Let's see how many ways we can respond to a question. Okay? I'm going to show you the two questions in just a moment. What I'm going to do then is put you into breakout rooms. What I want you to do is pick a secretary, pick someone who's going to keep track of how many different ways did you come up with to respond to these two questions. Okay? You'll only be in the room for 2 minutes. So after 1 minute, you're going to get that announcement that says you have 1 more minute left. So make sure that you talk about each question for 1 minute, okay? The two questions are you thirsty? And would you like to go to the movies with me? Now, you're not trying to write down all of the answers that you come up with. You're just trying to keep track of the number of answers that you come up with. Okay, so here we go. We're going back into the breakout rooms. Let's hope they work a little bit better this time. Apologize. And we have new people who are being assigned to breakout rooms. Okay, so it seems like people are starting to come back. What I'd like you to do as you come back is to go into the chat feature. Please have your secretary from your breakout room team enter the responses you found for question A and question B. Question A was are you thirsty? And question B was, would you like to go to the movies with me? So just enter A and a number and B and a number and see, let's see a little bit about how many responses we found to those questions. Look at these numbers. They're very, very high. 12 and 17, 12 and 18, 5 and 5. But the key point that we're want to talk about it while everyone is entering these results into the chat, we can discuss many of the features that went into your discussions, right? Because of course, when we look at a grammar textbook, or we look in a we're trying to teach students the language, we give them a question and one answer. But so many things go into how the context of that question changes and how therefore the answer to that question changes. The pragmatics, what's the relationship between the two people who are asking the question? Where are they? What's the situation? What's the purpose of the question? What's the tone of voice? What's the intonation? All of these things play a role in how those very static sentences are interpreted. And because of that, that makes the response very, very different. So it changes the grammar of the response. Okay? All of these and many more features play a role in the dynamism of language. I have another example here, right? All of these are from Diane Larson Freeman's book, Teaching Language from Grammar to Grammaring, on page 18. Are you going downtown after class? Aren't you going downtown after class? Are you not going downtown after class? You're not going downtown after class, are you? You're going downtown after class, aren't you? You're going downtown after class. You're going downtown after class? Going downtown after class? All of these are possible ways to ask the same question, but they are slightly nuanced differences in the way that the question is asked. And therefore, language, we have to think about grammar, we have to think about language as dynamic and not static. Okay, sorry. So now we're going to move on to the second myth we're going to challenge, which is that error correction or feedback is unnecessary. We've had a lot of SLA theories that have told us over time that we should approach error correction in various ways. We had behaviorist methods, like something like the audiolingual method, that said avoid errors at all costs, and so only accurate statements should be made. And so we had such things as repetition drills and those sorts of things. Communicative methods said to focus more on the communicative intent and less focus on errors. And so teachers were trained at that during that time that, you know, errors are to be expected, but we really want to focus on what the student is trying to say. There are lots and lots of criticisms of error correction in the research, that it's futile, that you can't actually teach the students through error correction, that it can be harmful to the students because it can cause their affective filter to be raised so that they won't want to engage in the language. Error correction can be ambiguous, especially when we're responding to students' writing. We can often circle something and make a comment and it's unclear to the student what that means. And often error correction is inconsistent because we cannot correct every error. And as teachers, we currently tend to focus on what are the most egregious errors, the ones that hinder comprehension. But because we're doing that and because we have the inconsistency, the students don't know, does this error correction here apply over here, because the student's knowledge is not enough. And we as teachers cannot fix every error in a student's writing or in a student's speech. So error correction's gotten a bad rap. So let's talk about what Larson Freeman says is good and are good characteristics of effective feedback, effective error correction. Okay. So the first is to attend to errors that show that the learner is ready to learn. Those of us that have studied second language research theories understand that learners can only learn what they have noticed and what they are aware of. And so if you see an error that the learner is struggling with, that you see that sometimes the learner is doing it correctly, sometimes the learner is doing it incorrectly, those definitely you should attend to. You should draw attention to those and say to the learner, look, I've noticed here you did this correctly and here you did this incorrectly. Let's talk about why this is correct. And let's see if we can get you to do it correct more often. The second thing for us to keep in mind when we're giving feedback to learners with error correction is that we should work on errors and not mistakes. Oftentimes in production of language, there can be mistakes. There can be false starts. There can be pauses. There can be filler, I don't know, those sorts of things. Don't focus on those. Those are for when you're trying very hard to polish for a presentation. Focus on the errors. Focus on the points in the language and the linguistic proficiency of your student where comprehension is inhibited, comprehension is problematic. At those points, that is where you will get learn. They will be able to learn from what you're giving them feedback on. Oops, I apologize. Sorry. The other suggestion that's made by Larson Freeman and a number of researchers is that you should delineate in your classroom, these activities are accuracy activities. In these activities, I want you to be completely accurate in the use of the language. And in other activities, you can focus on communicative nature of the activity. And so deal with those errors when they are specifically in an accuracy activity, not in every single activity, so that the students can actually focus on liking the learning process of the language and also liking the feedback process that they get from you. So overall, Larson Freeman suggests that we be affectively supportive and non-judgmental. Affectively supportive, not effectively. Of course, we want to be effective in our support, but affectively supportive means recognizing that affective filter that our students have, recognizing when they are starting to shut down because they don't like being called on their errors, or because we do not want the affective filter to be raised and then to not be able to help the student and to have them enjoy the language learning process. Okay, so now we're moving on to the third challenge. The third challenge is not all students need grammar instruction. Now, you can notice that I have 3 X's here, and this myth and this challenge persists. It persists in the media, in lay people's understanding. It persists outside of the knowledge of the profession of language teaching. But it's a false concept that children will pick up the language rules because their brains are more receptive. There is not research that bears this out. Both adults and children can benefit from formal instruction in grammar. Do children have more receptivity? They do in their brains. However, what the adults have is more cognitive maturity. And so the research has shown and everyone has an example and everyone has a story, right? But the research has shown that both can benefit from formal instruction in grammar, and both can be very successful in language learning, which is really exciting, right? Because we don't want to not be able to learn a language. We're teachers, we're language teachers, so we want to believe that we can learn a language. Okay, so we're going to go into our breakout rooms. And I want you to think about grammar instruction and your classroom. And I want you to imagine that you are a teacher of beginning level middle school English students. And I want you to look at the following structures and arrange them in the order you would teach them to the students. Okay, so one room member, our secretary in the room, should enter the letters in the order in the chat when you return from the breakout room. So take a look at the examples that we have. We have the verb to be in present tense, possessive determiners, my, her, his, subject pronouns, I, you, he, she, it, articles, a and the, basic statement word order, yes, no questions with the verb to be, negative statements with the verb to be, the present progressive, and singular and plural pronouns. So I'm going to break you into breakout rooms, and I'd like you to think through how you would structure this if you were teaching middle school, beginning level English students. And then the second question, if you have time, is to think about if they were adults, but also beginning levels, does the order change? Why and why or why not? Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I apologize for that. I apologize that you could not see the task when you were in the breakout rooms. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're trying this out for the first time, and that was clearly something that I should have anticipated, but I did not. And so the point being that as teachers, I will just summarize what we were hoping to accomplish with that task, is that as teachers, we are always trying to put the language into manageable chunks that could be sequenced in a certain way. We try, based on our training and curriculum development, we build a syllabus and we build a class. We try to start and carefully build upon the foundation we build for our students, and build and build and build. However, this linear thinking of the way to structure a syllabus is not the way that human beings engage with language. It's not the way that human beings understand language, especially after human beings have learned one language and are learning a second language. So we have a long history of sequencing in the linear way. But, however, that linear way only really works if our students are grammar machines. And they're not. They're human beings. Human beings bring an entire linguistic repertoire to the classroom. They engage with language not linearly, but dynamically. Larson Friedman adopts a biology term actually, to talk about the way that language is evolving in the understanding of students as they learn a second language. She uses the word morphogenesis. And morphogenesis refers to the creation of a new form. And if you think about it, as students are learning a language, they are developing their interlanguage. They're going from having no knowledge of the language on their path towards being a fluent, competent speaker. And this is their interlanguage period. And the interlanguage is a new form, and it is an idiolect. It is my own interlanguage, and my interlanguage is different from your interlanguage. So each student is developing their own form and their own understanding and their own scaffolding. So it's more like a network of understanding than a linear understanding. So let's move on to challenge number 4. This one is I hear this one even from my kids. Grammar teaching and learning is boring. And the question is, what is our job as teachers? Are we supposed to entertain our students? I don't think so. But I do think we are supposed to engage our students. And Larson Friedman puts it this way: it is at the point of engagement that most learning is likely to take place, when students are focused, relaxed, and attentive. As a teacher, how do I make grammar practice meaningful? So let's look at a typical grammar practice. let's say that the teacher is trying to get the students to practice the question form, did you, and change the verb tense and ask the appropriate question. And so you might walk by a classroom and you might hear the teacher say, I got up at 7. And you might hear the students respond back, did you get up at 7 o'clock? I took a shower. Did you take a shower? I got dressed. Did you get dressed? I ate breakfast. Did you eat breakfast? And this might be a way to practice the questions. However, think about how useful or meaningful is this practice, because it is not often, maybe never, that you ask the question after you have the answer. This is a feature of our language classrooms, but it is not a feature of regular normal life. And so students recognize this is a practice. So Larson Freeman gives another example of a meaningful grammar practice that she used. She brought her students in to the classroom. They sat down. She said, okay, close your eyes. She allowed a few seconds to pass. And she said, now open your eyes. And then she said, I have just changed 5 things about myself. Can you guess what they are? And students ask questions like, did you take off your watch? Did you open a button? Did you take off your shoe? Did you comb your hair? And all of these are much more meaningful grammar practice than the previous example where they were simply practicing the question and perhaps not even engaged. Here, they're engaged. They're looking at the teacher and they're trying to figure it out. You've introduced a little sense of competition. It's very exciting for the students to try to figure out what are those 5 things that have been changed. Now, this can't happen all the time. Of course it can't. However, as we move towards more meaningful practice, we move towards more engagement with our students, and therefore we move with more learning by our students. So, whoa, this slide is very busy. So these are the grammar myths that we've challenged today. We started with grammar as an area of knowledge, and we talked about how grammar is actually very dynamic. Language is actually very dynamic, not static. We talked about error correction or feedback is unnecessary, and we talked about being affectively supportive and non-judgmental. The third myth we talked about was not all students need formal grammar instruction, and we talked about how both adults and children can benefit from formal instruction in grammar. And then we talked about making practice, oops, I'm so sorry. Grammar teaching and learning is boring. Engagement is not boring. So make practice meaningful whenever it's possible. And that is all that I have. I don't know if we have a few minutes for questions.
Telephone.
Let me see if I can see the chat. Sorry, I'm trying to. Yeah, our students are not grammar machines. You're right, Mary. Are there any questions or comments? The differences between errors and mistakes. That's a very good question. Errors are typically patterned. You typically errors are typically patterned. So you can see an error pattern when you see the repetition of that error. Sometimes a mistake can be just a mistake that happens just in production. So you can mispronounce a word, you can use the wrong word. I've probably, if we went and looked at what I've said in this presentation, we might find that I chose the wrong word and said a different word than I actually meant to say. Those are mistakes. Those are things that are just part of the production of the language. But if there's a pattern to the error, if the student continuously uses past tense incorrectly or adds ed to every verb for past tense, then we have a patterned error. We understand that the student does not understand that some verbs have irregular past tense and some verbs use ed, right? So that becomes an error. And I would encourage you, when you're looking at errors, look at not the bigger ones, they're bigger. We think of them as bigger. Look at the ones that most inhibit comprehension. So help the student to overcome the errors that are the biggest errors, the ones that make it harder to understand what they're saying. And then once they've gotten those, then you can work on the past tenses and the plural markers and the things that don't keep us from understanding what they're saying. We have another comment. These days, learners feel pretty confident with lots of grammar mistakes, and they're sure they sound perfect. How to make them aware that they're mistaken and not to demotivate in learning and grammar and speaking? Another question from the audience. It's a great question. And I actually, when I'm teaching grammar, when I'm teaching language to a student, I try very hard to get to use my discourse analysis training with the student. And today, technology makes that so much easier. You can do things like read aloud protocols, where you have the students read a passage and then listen to you reading the passage or a native speaker reading the passage. And then they can start to notice where their pronunciation or their intonation or their grammar is incorrect. You can have them do the same thing with their own writing. You could have all of the students respond to the same picture, and then they can listen to another student's response and their response and talk about what are the differences between those two. And in doing that, what you're trying to do is you're trying to raise their awareness, right? So you're trying to get them to see or understand what they're doing that's wrong. One more question I think we have time for. Do you have any recommendations regarding meaningful grammar practices? Yes. Well, anything that is a practice, like the example we showed in the presentation, anything that is a practice that is meaningful, it's something that they might do it in the real world, not just in an English class, right? So anytime you can get them to practice something and not even know they're practicing, just trying to communicate, right? This gets them focused on the communication, and also you slip in that grammar practice, right? Because you're the teacher, you know how to do that. You know how to get them to engage in things that are meaningful. But is it harder to give meaningful grammar practice? Absolutely. It takes a lot more thought on your part. It takes a lot more thought on all of our parts, but it is more engaging. And I think that having the internet now and having resources on the internet, it makes it easier to search. You can use, maybe one day you're looking at a song that has the repetition of a grammar structure that you're focusing on, and you're having the students fill in the grammar structure. Maybe another time you are listening to a short lecture and you have the transcript, and because many things already have transcripts that are on YouTube, you are in good shape to be able to provide them those meaningful ways to unpack the language. And I think that might have to be it, because we are at exactly 1 hour. So I'm very, very grateful for your time and your attention. I hope that you found something useful in the webinar, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you so much.